Oh, there it is. Okay.
Bianca and Blake and Harold and Sanchez.
Yeah.
Got a full house. I love it.
Everybody's joining.
Must have picked a good title, Mark.
Yes. Yes. Well, we are getting ready to go ahead and get started here on today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and it is hosted by myself, Mark Brody, with Brohawk Solutions, and I'm very very pleased to have as our guests on this webinar, or our panelists on this webinar, Micah Peterson and Elle Torres of Procedure Flow. Now, today's webinar will look at improving onboarding and retention in the contact center through taking VOE insights, voice of the employee insights, and aligning them with training and knowledge management strategy. Before we get started, if you have questions for the speakers throughout the session today, we encourage you to go ahead and select the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, and we will get to those definitely by the end of the event. At the end, we're going to go ahead and do a drawing, a random drawing, using the wheel of names, and for a $50 Amazon gift card, e-gift card. Now let's go ahead and get into today's session. So today's featured guest on this webinar is Micah Peterson and Elle Torres with Procedure Flow. Micah and Elle, do you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Go for it, Micah.
Yeah, sure. So Micah here. I'm the VP of Product at Procedure Flow and one of the co-founders for the company. My background is computer science and knowledge management as a general interest. So I spent time learning knowledge-centered services and then building knowledge-based products, and got kind of frustrated with that area, and then came into Procedure Flow as a solution for knowledge management and got really excited about that. So started doing that, and we've just been growing the company for the last few years. We incorporated around 2015 and just did a $12 million raise, and just continuing to grow the team. So it's been a really exciting journey, and it's awesome to be here with you, Mark, today.
Well, thank you very much. Elle, how about you?
Oh, it's my turn, just as I was taking a drink of water.
Always, it's timing.
Great. My background is actually management and strategy consulting, and I never get tired of hearing Micah's origin story. We were actually just talking about it this morning. My background is kind of just working with businesses that were trying to fix whatever had gone wrong within their organizations, whether it was internal, external, or some combination. So a lot of business transformation work. And a lot of that has gravitated towards the contact center, because when I was 18, that was my first real job, and I've sat in that seat. Actually, just before joining Procedure Flow, I was an interim VP over at a large health insurer that's on the Fortune 25, and was running a contact center of about 3,000 folks onshore and about 2,000 off. So I know what it's like to try to manage that talent funnel, to try to get through the labor shortage, especially in rise of the pandemic, and then try to keep KPIs kind of going at the same time. And it's quite a bit of a challenge. And that's where I really got impressed with Procedure Flow when I was first introduced to it about 5 years ago. I'm sorry. It's just an absolutely innovative way to approach knowledge management, and the results are incredible. I never would have believed it if I hadn't seen it.
Excellent. Well, thank you both. And let's go ahead and get into the meat of it. Elle, as you were saying, you've only been with Procedure Flow a short time, but you've seen this as a practitioner,
Yes.
actually live and working and having an impact. So one of the things that you also mentioned was the labor shortage that's occurring, and we're not just talking about in one region or one part of the world or another. It's happening everywhere. So let's first start off with with this scenario. And what we'd like to know is how would you attack it from a CX perspective? And then, Micah, if you could kind of talk through, how procedure flow addresses the, some of these challenges, I think is the best way to go about this. So
If I could,
the
oh,
first, go ahead.
go ahead.
The first scenario is my recruiting team is doing an incredible job in finding great talent, but they're all saying the same thing. There's too much to learn, and this is the new hires, too much to learn and be responsible for out of training. And then, within, what they find is 30, 60, 90 days, the agents aren't as proficient as they would hope. And only about 30 to 40% of the class is actually staying in. What would you recommend as a solution, and how could procedure flow improve the training process and speed to proficiency? Let's incorporate some quality, within that first 90 days.
I do like to measure things, so definitely going to make sure that we talk about metrics. But I first want to kind of talk about what the labor shortage or the labor situation really is right now. I know I've heard the terms "great resignation" used a lot, especially over the past year and a half. But I like to kind of think of it as a great awakening, because what we're actually seeing is an evolution of expectations on the customer side and on the employee side. Entry-level employees may have come in 10 years ago and just learned a few things and were able to kind of go out in the wild and do what they were doing. And what they were earning at the time made sense for that labor that they were doing. But now, coming from US healthcare, from a really highly regulated industry, everybody has such niche knowledge within their organizations. And sometimes we forget to account for that when we're bringing brand new people in. And so what happens a lot is some folks come in and they have to learn a culture, and they have to learn the names, and they have to learn where the restroom is. And they also have to get a master's degree in whatever it is that the business does, and then also try to apply that into the process that they're being taught at the same time. It's a lot to ask for a new hire, whereas I could go out and potentially make the same thing, and all I have to worry about is whether somebody ordered fries or not with this order. And so if I have a choice between choosing whether I need to remember piles and piles of information that I can't even write down, or nothing at all, I'm probably going to choose the latter if the pay is the same. And so that kind of translates into a way that we need to reimagine how we're approaching those entry-level positions and make it so that it's an entry-level skill level that's required. And I think that's where procedure flow really comes in handy. And Micah, that's where your genius is just genius.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would add to that, I've heard just in the last year, there's like kids finding jobs where they can literally just play iPhone games and still make money because they just need a warm body in a gas station or something that's not very good. So they're definitely going to choose that. But yeah, no, I agree with all that. So from a procedure flow perspective, the world that I stepped into when I first encountered this idea was it was about information, and it never occurred to me in my full knowledge management background that when we write out information, we typically do it as text. So we write out, our everything we know, we write it out in English as a serial sentence. We stack them up as paragraphs on top of each other, and we feel good about, we've done the documentation, but then the people that have to use that and consume it, it's very challenging. And so from the origin story of procedure flow, it was a 900-page standard operating procedure binder, which is now just SharePoint and, Salesforce Knowledge tab or something. And you just, you're on the phone with a customer and you're trying to go through that type of material, or it's in the training classroom and you hit this wall. People don't want to read it, like their body just resists reading that information. And so what procedure flow is small hyperlink flowcharts in the sense of, re-representing that information in a totally different way that is visual, that is bite-sized, that is logical, it's colorful. It leads you, it gives you options when you run into exceptions and scenarios. And so really basic idea, but it transformed that business. They went from 6 to 12 months of painful onboarding where they were trying to get them to memorize everything through 8 weeks of training, etc., down to a 2-day orientation, a week and a half of listening to calls and having procedure flow, and then completely independent at about 2 weeks. So, you're going from like 10 months to 2 weeks. And so I met those people. It was very exciting, very dramatic. And so that from if you want to put it in 2 buckets, from an approach perspective, which one is an intuitive one and one is not so intuitive, is memorization versus real-time performance support. And that category has existed for a while, and there's a few products like from a systems training perspective that sit in that bucket. But really, most training has fallen into lecture style, nesting, testing. And that's all on the memorize. You're saying, I'm not going to let you talk to a customer until you've memorized, X amount of material, which is really impossible. What I found out through my first couple mapping exercises was that with customers was that from the simplest call centers to the most complex ones, there are about 500 to 2,000 different endpoints of how a call can go down. And that means, it doesn't mean that you have 500 call types. It means that when you get inside of that call and you break them down, they can turn in different directions and land in 500, 2,000 different ways. And that's impossible to memorize. So the solution has to be something other than you're going to learn it all up front. So
if I could just add to that just a little bit, if I translate this from a business leader's perspective, I think there's a fear that kind of takes a hold of a lot of my colleagues and a lot of my clients in the past as well, on not wanting that person to go onto the phones too soon because I'm afraid of what they might say or what they might do, because what we do is so niche and so special and so custom that we want to make sure that they have all of the information available and they're doing it the way that we would want them to do it in that moment. And we can't really account for that. We can't really control for the unknown or for things that haven't happened yet. I haven't found anybody that's able to automate, telepathy. Maybe that will be the next thing. But as of right now, we're in a remote environment. You pull all those concepts together and you've got somebody that's in a vacuum by themselves. They don't have anybody next to them that they could just ask. They don't have that visibility if they're the supervisor or the business leader to listen and to see what's going on and to kind of hear interactions and catch things before they happen. And so there's just this fear that sort of takes over. And we think that the answer to that, our instinct is to just add more data and add more text and add more this and more training. And it's not always the answer, because I can sit in a class for 3 weeks or for 6 weeks. It may not change what I do on that call all that much. And it's going to be a lot harder for me to remember. So what I really love about this concept is when it makes it easier for the user. And we now take this new approach to knowledge management to where we're not trying to take everything down into words, then I don't have to rely on them to remember any of it. All I need them to remember is how to log in and where to go, and they can have that information right next to them when they're taking the call. I know that it's going to be the information that I've put out there and made available to them, and that they have everything they need to answer the call without having to rely on any kind of recall and make sure that their training was absolutely accurate 6 weeks ago.
Excellent. I mean, the great points that you both just brought up. I mean, and the job has just become so complex, and if you're able to go ahead and reduce a training and proficiency time period from 6 to 8 weeks or longer down to a 1 to 3 week or 4 week even time span. I mean, what you're doing for the level of customer experience is just
It's incredible.
incrementally improved.
And I do want to caveat one thing you said there, though. The training time might be 6 weeks or 8 weeks, but proficiency is so much longer, right?
Yes.
How long does it take you to take that 6 weeks, 8 weeks and apply it into a way where you feel like independently you are the subject expert? That's the time that we shorten. Your class might stay the same, but the amount of time it takes for your person to be able to get it and become an independent ambassador of that information now goes from a year down to something like weeks or months.
Love that. I love that. And it's not just that becoming proficient, but it's also seen in the quality and CSAT scores. Is that what you're seeing with some of the clients that you're currently working with?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Where they see it usually the first or the soonest is going to be in repeat call and that whole time. So anytime you have somebody on the phone, regardless of what their tenure is, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 years, if they run into a wall, they have to, they have a series of tasks of I always usually ask, what is their first line of defense when they're in that moment? Are they going to what they've written down? Are they going to email? Are they going to IM or something else? They're trying to find out what their answer is and kind of help to resolve it while they have that person on hold. Usually that person is either still talking to them. So it's taking a little bit longer for them to even see what they need to see, or they're having to put them on hold, or worse, they're having to ask them to call back. So that overhead then doubles or triples based on how long that interaction goes and how many people are involved to help resolve that single interaction. That's where we see the soonest kind of ROI, I guess, for translating the way that you approach knowledge management. When you don't have to rely on bodies, it's so much cheaper to just rely on a system.
Mhm. I would just add a story in there. One of our first customers, they had we instead of rolling it into our training classroom, which is normally where we would start, they had to push it out to existing agents, which I was a little bit nervous about because I was like, will they already think they know what they're doing? Will they resist it? And so there's one, they loved it, but the one guy that I talked to had 2 years experience. And one thing that really frightened them, and we had a 50% reduction in the mentor calls where they put them on hold, they go inside and ask for help and come back. And he had 2 years experience, and it was special drug authorization calls. And what would happen is the call would come in, the customer would want to know, they would want an update. Can I get this special drug covered? And there's this assessment period of like 14 days. And so it would be in those days and the agent would freak out because the customer is so upset about it, right? It's health. And so they would put them on hold and go inside and make absolutely sure that they're giving the right answer. We put it in procedure flow. This guy with 2 years experience now doesn't put the customer on hold. He doesn't go inside and ask for help. He follows it and it says, I'm sorry, you're at day 5, you need to wait another 10 days. You can feel free to call back after that if we don't reach out to you. And then there's another one, if they kick back on that and they get angry, there was some stuff there about what do our best agents say when people flare up and get upset. And so all of that made them feel at ease and comfortable, better able to handle those calls. It drove down the whole time. It makes whether the customer's happy or not, it's the right thing to do for them and for the business, and ultimately, serves them better. So that's sort of an instance of that.
You mentioned something that's interesting in there too. When you're looking at voice of the customer metrics, and we're talking about FCR or reducing customer effort or improving customer satisfaction, there's some really great research. I know Forrester and Gartner have both got content on the subject. There's some really great research that suggests that it's really not about getting a favorable answer or being delighted in the way that we think about it, but it's about that confidence in the answer itself. I want to know that when I call in, the answer that I'm given is the answer that it is. And I don't have to call back. I don't have to do extra homework to try to make sure and validate that on my end. I don't want to be if I'm purchasing a service, I don't want to be their QA team as well, effectively. So that confidence really goes to trust and building loyalty, which is where we see that translation in the long-term ROI and customer loyalty overall.
That's right. And preventing where they hang up, call back and get a different agent.
Yes, answer shopping.
Get a different result, right?
Yeah. Do some of your clients, I want to stick with the answer shopping for a moment. Do you see a lot of your clients that you work with currently, are they seeing a reduction in repeat calls than as compared to when they didn't have procedure flow?
That's a unique question. You go ahead, Micah.
We do have statistics that support quite a dramatic reduction or increase in first call resolution, or FCR. The trick with that is the degree that you impact it is the degree that you're lying to yourself when you begin the journey in the first place. So I think a lot of people mark a higher first call resolution because their quality assurance test says something like, I asked the question, is there anything else I can help you with? And they said no. But that can go a lot of different ways, right? And so really you should be tracking the same phone number calling over a 7-day period, or other metrics that are more meaningful. And in those cases, you're going to see a huge impact on your FCR.
That's what I was going to say earlier on. It really kind of goes back to how the customer defines value. So if they define value as making sure that it's the one call and only one contact to resolve their issue, then of course they're going to be tracking that in some way. And it is sort of a mixture, like Micah was alluding to, between that actual, how many times did they call about this particular issue? So you have that, that kind of automated or that calculable sort of component to it. But then you also have the customer subjective path. If they got the correct answer and their issue was resolved, but they didn't get that confidence in whatever the agent was telling them, they're going to call back and make sure, or they're going to find some other way to confirm that. And that's still an interaction you have to pay for and support if it's not done correctly the first time.
And I like what you were just bringing up about confidence, because it's important that the customer has to have confidence in the information they're receiving.
Exactly.
But if the frontline agent doesn't have confidence in the information that they're providing, that's going to lead to a lot of frustration, because they know that if they don't provide the right information, their manager, supervisor, someone QA is going to come virtually tap them on the shoulder, or literally tap them on the shoulder and say, we got to talk about something here.
Right. Right. You asked earlier about class containment and folks that are seeing 30 and 40% attrition or higher within their classes in that 6 to 8 week training period. That's a lot of what I saw when I started kind of getting out into the voice of the employee and starting to understand what was causing those folks to leave in that gap that I would call early attrition, or before 6 months of tenure. And a lot of what I heard in that kind of cohort of people was a lack of confidence in being able to find the answer, being able to trust the answer, or just having so much information that they had to try to remember and keep track of that it was absolutely overwhelming. If you streamline that, it's not just reducing the friction for your customers, it's also reducing friction for your agents and giving you a much better shot at retaining them and making them better.
That's right. Yeah.
That's awesome. Micah, were you going to add something?
No, that's good.
By the way, Micah, I just have to call out your background. I love that background, by the way.
I'm a big Star Wars.
Yeah. Excellent. So let's go on to the next question. So one of the challenges that I think a lot of contact center leaders face is that you roll out new tools for teams, and sometimes frontline agents are like, oh, okay, here's something new. Here's the flavor of the day or the week or the month, or, oh, there's a new mural on the wall. I guess that's what we must be following now. So how can leaders be confident that knowledge is actually being used? So you roll out a tool like Procedure Flow, and there's changes that occur either within processes or how calls need to be answered, or whatever. How can leaders be confident that the tool is actually being used?
One of the biggest barriers in change management is understanding why and kind of feeling a part of the change. When you have a frontline employee population that feels like change is happening to them and not with them, then there's going to be some mental resistance. And that is definitely going to drive a fear and often a reality of non-adoption. And they're just resistant to it, and they're not going to adopt the new product, the new policy, or anything. But when you give them an opportunity to be a part of that and to help inform that change as it happens, then you kind of get them in a position where they're much more ready to accept it and to adopt it and change it. And then that's where you have the beauty of being able to measure it. First, you address the need of what it is that you're measuring and why. Are you measuring to try to beat them over the head, or are you measuring because you expect them to engage and you want to see what their actual feedback is? If we're doing the second thing, then there's a much better way to do it once you have their feedback and they're becoming kind of part of that change journey with you, and you're able to kind of get that real time, what is actually happening on the front line. That voice is going to be carried over into what it is that they're doing. And then Mike, I know you've got some great insight on how to measure that and make sure that it's happening effectively.
Yeah. And just also maybe add that, like, I'm a cynic. Like I'm very skeptical, and I think a certain amount of that is healthy, right? So an agent is using 50 different tools, and then you say, oh, we're going to use a new tool this month and it's going to help you. And there's like this, like, yeah, right. You know what I mean? And so how do you buy trust, from people that have been sort of on the short end of the stick there multiple times? And the reality is that what you're giving them has to actually work. It has to actually give them what they need. And in the case of Procedure Flow, my experience has been, it's like somebody's drowning in the ocean and you're literally throwing them a life preserver. You're throwing them that donut that's going to allow them to, survive, live, pull them out, because they're on the phone with the customer and they want to help that customer, but they can't because they don't know how. So we previously talked about doing that. So the first thing for me is, we have 80%, 90% voluntary login to our software in the call center use case, because what they need is in there, and it's in a format that they love consuming. And so you don't have to babysit it because they're brand new or they're newish and they need the help. And there's 500, 2,000 different endpoints why somebody calls. So they're going to be in there. So then, the secondary thing is, can we take the tenured people? What about the people that didn't turn over and they're really good and they're important to us, but they become a liability when the processes change and they don't keep up with them? And so what we do is we work with those folks and we say, hey, why don't you go in and break procedure flow? Why don't you go in and find something that's wrong? We have a crowdsourcing distributed version control model that allows participation from agents, and you can assign who can do that. But they say, hey, it's broken here, and then you approve it. Their name goes in the change history. Now they're part of it. They feel ownership. To Elle's point, it's like you have to engage them. You have to make them owners and make them part of it. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is, of course, there is babysitting, there's Big Brother stuff. And so we collect all of the click data on the back end in procedure flow. And not only to provide quality assurance, because if somebody makes a quality mistake, we want to correlate that to, were you in procedure flow? Did you use the playbook that we gave you? So that's a really important first check. But more importantly, we collect all that passively collect all that data. And then we show your continuous improvement team, look, everybody slows down here in this one section, and this is quite a used section of your flows. What could you do here to improve the system they're touching or the process itself? And then watch that for the next couple of weeks and see that time speed up there. And so the usage reporting event data is not just about babysitting Big Brother. It's also about naturally they're using it. And so then how can we use that to further bring value to the business?
I want to talk a second about the Big Brother technology. In a lot of environments where I've seen that, I will say, first of all, that I have pretty much only seen that in some of the most contentious environments. So usually that's kind of a sign that something else is going on, or there's some cultural kind of disconnect somewhere in there. But a lot of the resentment and disengagement that I've seen in terms of the employee engagement and actual kind of morale on the floor from those Big Brother programs isn't so much that they exist, but that there's a perception that they need to exist. And so it's also a matter of, when we're measuring someone's performance, are we giving them the right tools to perform? Or are we sitting them out into an ocean without a boat, without a paddle, and saying, hope you can make it? We have to give them the tools to be able to perform if we're going to keep them accountable and try to measure them in terms of, productivity metrics.
One of the other use cases that I've heard Elle and Micah, both of you talk about, in the past, is when you have new products or new promotions that are being rolled out, and oftentimes, companies, will go ahead and just say, well, we sent an email because we don't have time to go ahead and pull people off. Talk to me a little bit about how procedure flow fixes that problem, that challenge.
I think I'm currently about 2 days behind my email. So I think that's the first kind of just real example is everybody up to date all the time? And also, if you're talking about in terms of a contact center, are you paying them to check their email or are you paying them to answer calls? It's a very, very different thing to be notified that something has changed. And then again, to have that in context where I need it. It's the same concept as sitting in a class for 6 weeks, but I don't actually experience that scenario until 12 months down the line.
Yeah, you're paid for lower average handle time, not reading emails. So that
Deciphering them.
the solution that we found in product, actually, we borrowed from the computer programming world. There was a really, I'll bore you with a little programming story here for a second. So 1998, Linus Torvald, who created Linux, which is what Google search runs on, all these servers in the background, really cool operating system. They had 3,000 programmers working on Linux globally on like the same version of the product, essentially. And so different time zones, working asynchronously, and they couldn't, if one person wanted to make a change, they would have to lock it up and nobody else could do anything else. So Linus Torvald created this new version model, distributed version control, which allows you to all work on it at the same time and then merge your changes together. And when he created that model, there was some tooling that had to go along with that. And one of them was really important, was side-by-side comparison of the before and after. and you visually mark up with red and green colors, I changed this line of code, or I added this, or I deleted this. And so then you show the before and after as a side-by-side comparison, and very, very quickly the programmers can see, oh, I can see what he did, or how I need to merge these together. And so when we built Procedure Flow, we were like, let's use this versioning model. It's so cool. You can crowdsource across. Our largest customer has 25,000 licenses, plenty of full-time knowledge management people all working in there at the same time. And then this side-by-side view, when there is a change made, allows the agents and the approvers and everyone to quickly spot the difference. It's like one of those kids games where you circle, the guy has a striped shirt or a polka dot shirt, and it's like, what's different in this picture? And so just visually and very quickly, oh, okay, that's what changed in the process, versus reading 3 paragraphs in an email, versus go reread this knowledge base article or this who's going to do that? Nobody's going to do that, right? And so probably 3 times a day, morning, noon, and before they leave, they'll check the change history, view the side-by-side. And when you talk to them at an agent level, they love it. I had one girl actually pull me. I was walking by a hall and she pulled me in and was like, I love that I don't have to read 500 emails anymore, and I can just click to the difference. So you feel, their enthusiasm for not getting changes in that email kind of way.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think there's another thing to be said about, if I know the procedure well enough to know what would change, if I see the new one, I'm probably not out looking for documentation on it. So it's also kind of playing to the user demographic in their reality and meeting them where they're at, which is another thing that we talk about a lot. I like, Michael, what you did, and you took the kind of knowledge within an organization and translated that as code, which is exactly what it is. If you think about it, we give them very specific inputs and we expect a very specific output. And so it makes sense for us to lay those things side by side and say, this is the instruction that you were given. Here's what's different. Here's why. But also, I'm only going to tell you about this when it's relevant to what you're doing.
Yeah. Just kind of, taking this to, let's go ahead and level up on our questioning a little bit. So, one of the things that, consumers and customers are really focused on from a CX perspective is not what my experience is with you as a company I'm doing business with today, but the best experience that I'm having across any company I'm doing business with. And so that really requires companies to focus not just on their CX as a buzzword,
Right.
Or a title, but as how do we get better? How do we give the perception and give the give the thought to our consumers that our experience that we're providing you is head and shoulders above anybody else in our industry, and can compare with the likes of any of the big dogs out there from a CX perspective. So one aspect though of CX is you have to drive that employee experience. You have to create that retention strategy, and the employee engagement aspect that I think Procedure Flow has lends itself to creating those retention moments, because all of a sudden then their voice is being heard when changes need to occur, as opposed to continuing going down a long path. What are your thoughts on I know I just kind of unloaded a lot on you both, but what are your thoughts on kind of those scenarios, how customer experience is being viewed, and then how Procedure Flow can kind of focus more on the retention and the empowerment aspect that agents are really looking for?
I think in larger organizations, especially when we think about the customer experience, there's a couple of things that I feel like are very underutilized within that space for business leaders. And that's the very simple fact of just encouragement and engagement on the employee side. We do a lot of negative reinforcement. We do a lot of coaching and all of that stuff. There's always going to be disciplinary procedures available, but recognition is not something that we think of as proactively as we should as a whole. That's across industries. But the other thing that I think is underutilized is just the reality and very simple math of 90% or better of your customer interactions are probably happening with your customer service staff. So it would make sense that we're focusing first on the population of employees that are spending the most time with our customers face to face with them, and not just providing a service that they're paying for, but they're literally their express purpose, their singular function is to be there for the customer. If I make their experience better, then they're going to make my customer's experience better. And then the opposite is also true. If I don't invest in that employee experience, but I expect things to improve and I continue to invest in the customer and only the customer, then that agent, that disgruntled agent or that disengaged agent also has the power to take 90% of your customer interactions that are happening with them.
That's right. Yeah. I would break that up into 2 or 3 buckets, Mark. The first is you made a pretty strong statement about is my industry, is my contact center being compared to world class, whether it's a new shiny thing like Uber and Airbnb and things like that, where it's all app driven, or if it's a towering company like Amazon, where they're processing, millions and millions of transactions and doing it very well, and relatively good. Like I've never had a hard time with customer support with Amazon, if you could even call it that, in terms of I solve my own problems on there, et cetera. And so when you're talking about the highest levels of experience from a customer perspective, I think it's interesting to go into that place as a thought exercise and say, what is my business like capable of, and being realistic. So for instance, I think a lot of people, when you go to trade shows and conferences, they aspire to be like Amazon, right? And but the reality is that maybe your business, the leadership is not all about self-service, or the leadership isn't about helping rebuild your product or website or mobile apps in such a way that people don't need to call. And if that isn't happening, then customer service is going to become the dumpster fire of everything that's going wrong with the business and the brand. And that's okay. Like most people's customer support, even our own support department to some degree, is if somebody's calling, they have a problem with their product and it's something that we could probably fix, but we haven't been able to prioritize or get to yet. And it's shifting all the time. And so we have somebody there to catch it and love on them and say, okay, we're going to fix that part of the product and move on, right? And so that's the reality, I think, for 90+% of businesses, is that it's this burning dumpster fire of, what's wrong with your business. And we're there to catch them. We're there to love them and help them. And so if that's the case, then really what we need to do is support the agents, kind of to Elle's point, is like, how do we give agents the tools, the way to, answer and help those in an effortless experience, not for the customer necessarily, because they had to call, but for the agent who has to help with all that fallout.
A little bit of both, right?
Well, it would ideally be both. So if you have leadership that's taking strides, spending the money, sponsoring, if they're committed over the long haul, because it's not a one-time project, it's a forever project, to say our website, our app, our mobile app, whatever, is going to build in ways to make the customers' lives easier, then that's great. Those are, and companies should be doing that. It's tough, and it takes a lot of money, takes a lot of resources, and it's ongoing. And so, there's both, right? And there's reality versus, the best in the world. And so I don't judge. I don't judge any contact center very harshly. And I think we're all kind of in the same boat in terms of like, we all wish we were Amazon, but it's not necessarily the case.
There's also
as you're, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry. Micah just reminded me of something that that I wanted to mention earlier in my response there. But when we were talking about your goal isn't necessarily to be that customer experience that surpasses everybody else. But if you think about this from, again, the customer's perspective and how many merchants we interact with on a day-to-day basis, I use my lights, I go outside, I'm driving my car, I'm getting gas, I'm doing all of these different things. I'm technically having a ton of customer experiences as the customer on a daily basis. But if I think about those customer experiences that really matter to me, or if somebody asks me a question like this, and I'm thinking about the ones that stand out, it's going to be, yes, overwhelmingly negative, but it's also going to be, when I didn't have to think about it, that was the best. The best customer experience is one that I forget happened, or one that I never hear about as a business leader. And that's something that I think we don't really put enough priority on and really kind of take to heart in a way that we should. What we're trying to do here is make it easy, prevent the call from ever needing to happen. But if it does happen, let's at least prevent them from having to make that call again, or from having, further friction down the line.
Yeah, and I was going to add as a secondary bucket that it's really important to understand your as is process, and a lot of businesses don't want to, face the reality of that work. Procedure flow to support the agents, makes a way for mapping your as is process, which then the question is, along with, you've operationalized it, it's being maintained, and you're reporting on it. So now you've created a virtuous circle where you can say, we're using the process, here's what's going wrong with it, or where it's taking a long time. You fix the process, you make it better. And so you're constantly making the business better. And in some cases, our customers have taken what we've mapped for the agent as a blueprint to then automate that, because they now see it for what it is, and they go, we don't need a human doing that, right? And so that's a very powerful concept, to have an as is, have it be crowdsourced and maintained, report on that, and then spin that, that flywheel.
That is kind of an interesting thing, though, too, because it puts you in a sticky situation. It's a lot easier to place blame on process defects if I don't understand the process. Okay. So,
well, as you both were going through that, I mean, it reminds me of one of my favorite movies, Moneyball. If you try to play like the Yankees in here, if we try to play like the Yankees in this room, we're going to lose to the Yankees, on the field. Okay. And so when companies, and Mike, I think you brought up this point, when companies try and be something that they're not equipped to be, they're going to lose. They're going to lose in the market. They're going to lose against their competitors. Until they figure out what, where the right swim lane is. I tell people from a technology standpoint, you don't give the keys to a Lamborghini to a toddler. Let's figure out what the right fit is for you, and get really good at those things, and then you can add those other tools and bells and whistles in here. But I think from a starting point, looking at your processes, at the agent level, what are agents doing, and how is that impacting the customer experience, I think are great starting points. Now, I know procedure flow, seems like it can solve a lot of the challenges that contact centers are facing these days. But one area that seems to always get pushback whenever you or I or whoever talks to a contact center leader is they bring in IT. And the technology folks are saying, look, we don't have the time to put a new tool or a new resource on our technology stack, and we don't have the people to go ahead and actually make procedure flow do all the cool things that it's supposed to. When someone comes back and says, hey, we just don't have the internal resources to do this or make this work for us, Micah, how do you put someone's mind at ease, about the implementation process and the impact to other contact center technologies?
Yeah, so first and foremost, it's IT light, or it's like a nil, in the sense of, the operational group can own procedure flow. And so we benefit from a few things. One is, it is knowledge management. You're showing a human what the process is. And so there's no data flow, no integration, no personally identifiable information, which means that it's a light, security review that you're going through, because the information is not, detrimental. That facilitates going quickly. The user management's very easy to set up, and so IT doesn't have to get involved from that perspective. And then we have conversations about, should it integrate, should it embed inside of Salesforce? We have those conversations in terms of setting up the agent desktop. But the reality is that you're going to be going through the procedure flows, and so that's pretty straightforward. From an implementation perspective, getting up and going quickly, it's very light. We map at the speed of conversation. We get really great reviews when we survey people who've done an implementation, and we have a deep bench of mapping experts that have great industry experience, and they're going to do the heavy lifting for you and with you and teach you, how it works. And so we've been just doing those back to back to back. We keep hiring, we're busy. And there's lots of them. But we just got trade shows going again. So we have this everybody's sweating because we're dumping stuff off from trade shows. But it just goes so well, and it's such a great team. And all I can say is it's fast. It's very cost effective. It's very IT light, and it's very fast to get up and running. Like you're talking about, getting to results within a month versus some 18-month implementation of something that's really a gamble.
I will also say the question of capacity almost always comes back down to strategic priority at the end of the day. If you're in the middle of a massive platform migration from cloud or from something onto a cloud, there's going to be a lot of resources needed to be able to kind of support that effort. So I can completely understand that sometimes it just isn't the right time to do this or even support someone else doing it, on your behalf. But then you kind of have to think about, with all of the capabilities and all of the benefits that are offered by something like this, where you don't have the customer friction, where you don't have as many resources that need to go back to your more tenured, your more expensive resources for help. You don't have all of this repeat call volume and all of these things that can be possible and can be made available by doing this. What is that future worth to you? And where does that fall on your list of priorities? How much are you willing to spend until we can say, cloud migration is great, really want to do that, but also my customers are dealing with these issues now, and they're going to continue to feel this pain until that pain is resolved. And so at some point, I need to determine what it's actually worth to me to say, I'm going to make this better, even incrementally, while I do these other things, because my customer is going to still be there and still have expectations for me to do that at the same time, no matter what else is on my plate.
And the customer expectations are going to continue to rise. They're not going to slow down.
Absolutely.
They're not going to slow down. Well, excellent. This has been a great conversation, Micah and Elle. Any final closing comments from the two of you?
I'm just curious if there's any questions.
Oh yeah. I was just gonna say, Mark, I still fully expect you to have a mohawk. Like every time I come back to you, I want the Brohawk mohawk.
I was very disappointed that there was no mohawk to go with the Brohawk.
Yeah, but I know someday it's gonna. And I'm just gonna throw out a thing about, just how important scenario-based training is as well. I know I made it sound like you can just drop somebody on day one into the agent environment with procedure flow and you're off to the races, which is kind of true. And I still like that idea, but the reality is there's a training period. And so scenario-based training versus lecture style, we didn't really talk about that much, but would love to, if any of your guests wanted to chat more about scenario-based training and what's going on there. There's some really exciting stuff that's emerging there in technology and companies and partners. And so we can maybe that's another visit with you where you have a mohawk and we talk about scenario-based training.
You know what? I have an idea for a Halloween costume now.
Yes,
the Brohawk mohawk.
Yeah, let's do a LinkedIn profile picture and all that stuff.
Oh yeah. Oh man, that would be amazing. Probably scare some people too.
You should also post a video of you getting the mohawk though, because I need to see the transformation.
Oh my gosh, it's scary. Well, a little segue from what Micah just said. Any questions out there? If you do have any questions, feel free to either put them in the chat window or the Q&A, and we can go ahead and get to those. I'm in the process, as you may have seen. My eyes going to this other screen over here. I'm creating the wheel of names, and I think I've gotten everybody in there, and I definitely want to be able to do this drawing for a $50 gift card, and it doesn't look like there's any particular questions as of right now. So I'm going to kind of come back to this, and we've asked a lot of questions throughout the webinar today. As far as next steps, if you do have questions for Micah, Elle, and the procedure flow team, feel free to reach out to me directly, or you can find Micah and Elle on LinkedIn as well. But I would love to be able to help you get your answers. I've helped as part of Brohawk Solutions. I've helped companies go ahead and get this onboarded, and with great success. up to this point. And, Micah and Elle can really talk into the details on what it means from a CX perspective, what it means from an EX perspective. And I mean, Micah, I know that you guys have some clients with like over 10,000 agents on procedure flow right now.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's really having such a positive impact on their worlds. So there will be a survey that will be at the end of this webinar. As always, feel free to go ahead and connect with us on LinkedIn if you're not already connected with us. We'd love to continue the conversation. As Micah said, training is his jam, and I've it's not just Star Wars or Star Trek, but training is where he loves to have these conversations. And yes, feel free to schedule 15-30 minutes with him. I mean, you may want to actually block out an hour, and I say this with all the love for Micah that I have. You schedule 30, you're probably going to get an hour's worth of conversation with him. So
Every time I talk to Micah, I learn something.
Yeah.
I learn a lot.
Now
Yeah.
with that, I'm going to go ahead and actually I'm going to share my screen here so everybody can see the wheel of names.
While you're doing that, Mark, I was going to ask though, if there's anybody in the Central Texas region, I'd love to see them next month if they want to ask any questions in person.
Oh yeah, Elle, great segue. So one of the other things that I do as a volunteer, and Elle's going to be participating from Procedure Flow. You're actually going to have a booth there. We have the Austin Contact Center Alliance is having our 2022 Fall Symposium. It's actually going to be in person in Austin, Texas. We do have registration that is up for that. Again, this is my volunteer gig, so I'm doing a shameless plug for ACCA, while we're here. But feel free to come out and meet Elle in person, and I'd love to meet you in person, and we'd love to be able to go ahead and answer any questions that you may have, and get you a solution that works. So with that, so we have the wheel of names. I don't know if you've all seen the wheel of names before, but this is one of my favorite online tools. So I'm going to go ahead and spin this, and let's see who wins the $50 gift card.
I feel like we need that Wheel of Fortune ticker sound.
Yes. Edward B.
Right.
So Edward, I will get your contact information, or if you just want to go ahead and just send it directly over to me via chat, or I can take a look at your registration as well. And I will get you this $50 Amazon gift card that I will send over to you this evening. And I'm going to stop sharing there, and just say thank you to Micah, Elle, the rest of the Procedure Flow team for participating in today's session. I really, really appreciate it, and I think that I hope we brought a lot of value for anyone who attended today. And feel free to go ahead and let us know how we can go ahead and answer any additional questions that you may have.
Thank you.
Thank you all. All right. Have a great day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll be talking to you soon. Thanks.
See ya.